Thank you, sir. I am very pleased to commend to the House the appropriation bill and to commend Rob Lucas on the delivery of his 8th state budget. The 2021-22 budget is a budget that sets South Australia up for success. It is a budget about keeping South Australia strong and indeed seeing us come out of the coronavirus pandemic and all of the disruption that has been experienced over the last 15 months and is still being experienced, coming out of that pandemic stronger than before. It's a budget, sir, that creates jobs, that builds what matters, as the Minister for Infrastructure often tells us in relation to our record $17.9 billion investment in infrastructure over the next 4 years. And, sir, it delivers better services. And I'm very privileged in the education portfolio as Minister to be able to see the impacts on all three of those strains, because indeed the work that we are doing is creating jobs. Our school building programs are creating jobs right now at a time when they've never been more important. And our investment in TAFE, more than $200 million of new investment, of new money in this budget to support TAFE, to help it rebuild indeed from some of those extraordinary cuts imposed on TAFE between 2015 and 2017 by then Treasurer Koutsantonis, and indeed the unrealistic revenue expectations. That support for TAFE creates jobs. It's saving some jobs at TAFE. It's also helping South Australia's business and industries have the workforce needs that they have been met. And further than that, sir, it is helping young South Australians and older South Australians seeking to reskill to get the skills they need for the jobs of the future and the jobs of today. So that support for TAFE, that building program in our schools is creating jobs. Of course, it is also building what matters. We are building a legacy of educational infrastructure in South Australia that is not only going to be serving our community now at a time where we need to increase our capacity in our schools to deal with the significant enrolment demands, it is leaving a legacy of substantial improvement to our educational facilities that will be welcomed by future generations of South Australians, and which indeed will enable teaching and learning to be truly delivered at a world-class level in facilities that are designed for the pedagogy, for the manner of teaching and learning that is supposed to be taking place in our classrooms in the 21st century. This legacy, of course, has been talked about for some time. At the end of 16 years of the Labor government, they very proudly talked about their $690 million investment that they called Building Better Schools. That's been grown in recent years to the point where the Parliament, I think every member of Parliament is aware that we've grown it to a $1.3 billion program of works. And this year's budget papers indeed, of course, identify that that body of work that has been in the budgets, in the works, and recommitted to since we came into government has gone well past $1.3 billion, indeed past $1.4 billion. More than $1.4 billion worth of infrastructure in our schools. It's the biggest public school build in our state's history. We put our priorities where the Education Department has identified that they're necessary. A significant amount of that has been to deal with capacity. Some of that's to do with the move of Year 7 to high school has obviously seen more students in our high schools. Some of that is to do with significant population shifts and enrolment trends. There's been urban infill, especially after 16 years of Labor planning policy that has seen dramatic urban infill, which has overwhelmed some schools in terms of the amount of young people now living in those areas, to the point where, for example, in Ross Trevor, at the specific advice and request and business case prepared by the Department for Education, an entire new school, 1,200 students from Year 7 to 12, is being built in this budget. Enrolment trends, urban infill, and indeed the choices that people make, the confidence that they're showing in public schooling has seen enrolments grow, especially in certain areas. So certainly meeting those enrolment capacities is a significant part of it. It's also about fixing infrastructure that needs to be fixed. And indeed, in this year's budget, we also see $42 million worth of investment at 7 sites, schools and preschools, from Lucindale to Elliston in the southeast to the west coast, in Langhorne Creek in Salisbury East, at Pimpala Primary School in the member for Hurtle Vales electorate, I think it is, at Seaview Downs Primary School and Nailsworth Primary School. Those 7 sites are seeing an investment of a further $42 million. These are sites that drastically need this investment to ensure that the facilities that they have are able to offer the quality of learning environment that those children and young people deserve. Investments in TAFE have been significant. Investments in buildings have been significant. The third pillar of the budget themes has, of course, been delivering better services. And everything that I've spoken about already in education and everything else in education is about delivering better services. Our ambition, sir, is for nothing less than world-class education. An education system that sees every child in South Australia, whatever kindy or classroom they're in, whatever school or preschool, whatever town or suburb or city they are in, supported to fulfil their potential, to get a year's growth in every year of their education, to have their educational ability stretched, to have their well-being supported, their resilience supported, their development supported. And that, sir, is an important investment. Every single day, everyone working in education, from the minister down to every single staff member across the department, I have every confidence. Our ambition is shared, and we all, in every day, seek to improve the work we do, because the work we do is in supporting our young people to be their best, to live their best lives, to be able to fulfil their best futures. So one of the very exciting parts of the budget is the investment, therefore, in education. We are seeing well over 1,000 extra educators employed by the end of the budget forward estimates compared to last year, and you can add hundreds and hundreds of more net increase since we came to government. We are seeing record expenditure in terms of the recurrent funding to go alongside the record expenditure in terms of the infrastructure funding. But, sir, the extra funding, the record funding, is an input. Inputs are useful. Inputs are important. But they are not as important as outcomes. Our government is focused on delivering outstanding achievements in both the inputs into education, identifying its high priority, but also, sir, in the outcomes. That's why we have invested in early learning, in phonics, in the improvement of early years literacy. It's why we've invested in reforms to vocational education training and the transition of Year 7 into high school, so that our schools are and our preschools are delivering for our students the best possible outcomes. It's why we are investing in an entrepreneurial learning strategy, our music education strategy, our set of projects to support languages in schools, and indeed our Aboriginal education strategy, a tremendously important lever in what we're trying to achieve in our world-class education system, sir, as we seek to ensure that that group of South Australians towards whom we have at least all of the same obligation as we do to every South Australian child, plus added the moral obligation to support the young people of our First Nations peoples who are behind their counterparts in non-Aboriginal communities in terms of life expectancy, in terms of health outcomes, in terms of educational achievement. We have that moral obligation and an absolute burning desire to do our best for them. So that Aboriginal education strategy, with its 10-year ambitious goals, its consistency of action plans that are being developed by the Education Department and delivered by the Education Department, are all important. One of the key things in this year's budget, sir, that adds even further to the work that's been done over the last 3 years is the announcement of a $50 million early learning strategy. This is going to see ongoing funding of $16 million per year in new money invested in our littlest learners, identifying families as first teachers, but supporting those families to be able to assist their children to be their best, not just through life, but indeed identifying that there are significant things we can do before they even reach school. It's aimed at supporting all young children, sir, to thrive and learn. The focus of the strategy is working with families on high school preschool learning programs and relationships, and increasing the proportion of children developmentally on track even before they get to preschool, sir. It's a 10-year strategy with expenditure of $50 million in the first 4 years and then $16 million a year in new money ongoing. But there'll be more than that, of course, invested because, of course, we'll be focusing some existing resources on delivering according to the principles of the strategy. We'll be looking, as the member for Colton outlined earlier, and I'll talk a little bit about his engagement in this work further on in my comments, but particularly looking at those development checks. Every parent knows that the CAFS nurses, the Blue Books, are a really important part of those first few weeks of a child's life. And indeed, sir, we know that 90% of our children born in South Australia have their first development check in their first few weeks. So the Blue Book visit is very well understood. Milestone checks are also offered at 6 to 9 months, 18 to 24 months and at preschool. And the sad fact is, sir, that only 28% of our children get that 6th-month check. Only 18% of our children get that 18-month check. Only 50% of our children get that preschool check. And this isn't a new phenomenon. This has been going for some time. I think it is clear that when we see South Australia declining from 2009 to 2018 in the AEDC index, the Early Childhood Development Index of Wellbeing, developmental vulnerabilities, we see our state declining in terms of outcomes, increasing numbers of children vulnerable on one or more domains. When other states have had the reverse experience, then it's clear that work needs to be done here, aiming to reduce developmental delays in children entering school. This strategy, sir, has been informed by analysis of the current status of preschool education in South Australia and early childhood services, by expert advice, research and consultation with practitioners. It's been informed by our consultation with other states. Western Australia, which has seen indeed a marked decline in the number of children presenting at school with developmental vulnerabilities between that same period of 2009 to 2018, at the same time that in South Australia our numbers have been going in the wrong direction. It's been informed by a Your Say survey that indeed many South Australians, hundreds of families and hundreds of practitioners, preschool and early childhood educators, experts, researchers and people who are interested in early childhood development contributed to that. There were significant levels of targeted stakeholder engagement. I just also want to identify some specific work done by some outstanding public servants in this area, from Rick Pearce as the Chief Executive of the Education Department, down through Executive Director Carolyn Crozer-Barlow and Director Natalie Atkinson, and some of the absolutely outstanding early childhood educators who have led the work on developing this body of strategies, particularly Asha Crozier and Nadia Karawatso, two extremely well-regarded educators. Asha from the country, from Keith, Nadia from the northeastern suburbs around Ingle Farm, but both broadly experienced beyond that, and directors of children's centres with high levels of regard around the profession. I'd also take the opportunity to thank my staff member, Sarah Hennessy, who worked very hard on this. Also, Matt Cowdrey, the member for Colton, and Nicola Centofanti, the Honourable Nicola Centofanti MLC, who, as Liberal members of Parliament, took a particular interest in this area. And while obviously they weren't involved in the particular development of the body of work that went to Cabinet for the budget, they took themselves very strongly, I would say, as a lobby group within the Liberal Party room to work very strongly with me to encourage this to be a priority for the government. And I thank them for that contribution. Also, the work that they did engaging with a range of people in their communities, early childhood leaders, encouraging people to engage with the process that was worked on in developing this policy. They did an outstanding job as members of the Parliament, and I thank them for that, and I thank them for the contribution that they have made towards this $50 million strategy through the many suggestions that they gave me and the government along the way. Also recognise Anne Glover, the chair of the Professor Anne Glover, I should say, AO, I think, chair of the Child Development Council of South Australia, who's an outstanding South Australian. The body of work that the Child Development Council does, Anne as the chair, Graham Jeschke as the deputy chair, currently the acting chair, and all of the experts on that council have done a significant body of work in this space. They released in 2020 the How Are They Faring? South Australia's 2020 report card for children and young people. And it too was instructive in some of the development of this policy work. It found the How Are They Faring report from the Child Development Council that most children and young people in South Australia are doing well, but also evidence that an increasing number of children were entering the education system with unidentified disabilities and developmental delays. Indeed, around a quarter of South Australian children start school developmentally vulnerable in one or more of the following domains: physical health and well-being, social competence, emotional maturity, language and cognitive skills, communication skills and general knowledge. Unmet needs during the early years are leading to poor health and life opportunities for some Australian children, some South Australian children. And while, sir, we have record levels of funding, more than $300 million last year, up from about $240 million just a couple of years ago, in supporting children in schools with disabilities. And that is something that those opportunities to fund those children are absolutely locked in as a result of national school funding reforms, which South Australia was the first state to sign up to. We will give whatever support is needed in our schooling system through the financial support to schools or the special options placements for children. But how much better is it, sir, if somebody is able to have a diagnosis of a developmental delay or a problem in some of these areas earlier in life? That's why our strategy supports extra developmental checks, and we will work with CAFs and other non-government providers to dramatically lift the uptake of those developmental checks that are already available. 28% at 6 months and 18% of children at 18 months taking the opportunity to have those checks is not enough, sir. We need to lift that, and we also have the introduction of the new checks taking place that will be available in addition to those at 12 months and 3 years going forward. In conversations about learning and education, sir, sometimes we can be left with the impression that education begins when the child walks through the classroom door, and we know that this is not the case. Children are developing and learning at a rapid pace from birth, long before they engage with any form of formal education. Research over the past decade has provided us with an even greater understanding of the developing child, and understanding that this early learning provides a basis for lifelong learning and progress. It informs us that early experiences can have a lasting and profound influence on a child's life trajectory. Hence, the importance that we do everything we can to get this right for children and families, particularly those in difficult circumstances who benefit the most from quality learning opportunities. In the early years, we know there is a lot going on cognitively, socially and emotionally in the child's development as children shape and respond to their world in subtle and sophisticated ways which sometimes, sir, aren't even readily identifiable or observable in their behaviour. Sometimes, of course, they are. The interrelation between genes and environment begins at conception, continues in the early years and lays a foundation for later learning and success. Our early learning strategy goals are about increasing the number of children developmentally on track, providing high-quality educational programs and supporting families with parenting during these times. Evidence shows children who receive quality early childhood experiences and opportunities have enhanced education, social, health and employment outcomes as adults. It's clear that social skills, knowledge and health developed early in life are predictors of success later in life, and the strategy recognises and supports the key role played by families too in the development not only of cognitive skills but social skills, emotional regulation, persistence, the ability to delay gratification, all of which are important in achievement at school, in creating fulfilling personal relationships and, sir, for workplace productivity. This strategy is nuanced. It's developed with that broad range of stakeholders, literally thousands of South Australians and many, many experts, and it is informed and shaped by current national and international research. It will see changes to some early childhood services and programs, building on the initiatives and learning our department has made. Play-based activities are developmentally appropriate and they're a fundamental element. Also important is the child's relationship with adults in the home or in care and educational settings where the child's need for safety, security, caring, loving relationships creates the environment in which a child can thrive cognitively, emotionally and socially. Helping our children to prosper is one of the great privileges of being a parent or an early years educator or anyone who works in this area. The department will also lean into our efforts to continue to build on the strong history of quality preschool programs in South Australia. Responding to the needs of children and families, we'll be exploring opportunities for stronger connections prior to children starting at school, including the child and health development playgroups in the community, with the intention of supporting families with their children's health, development and learning, working with non-government organisations to ensure that we can give good tips to families along the way. And, sir, if anyone in this chamber was in any doubt of the strength of work that has gone into the development of this policy, the value of that investment, let me leave it to former South Australian Labor Premier Jay Weatherill, who, as CEO of the Minderoo Foundation, I understand, said today, "We congratulate the South Australian Premier, Stephen Marshall, and his team on this crucial investment in future generations that recognises the importance of the early years on children's future health, happiness, growth and development." I thank Jay Weatherill for that endorsement of the South Australian Government's early learning strategy, and the Minderoo Foundation, I hope, will have an opportunity to partner with the Minderoo Foundation in a number of the opportunities we'll seek going forward. We'll be looking to partner with local governments, with NGOs, with a range of people in delivering these outstanding outcomes for the very, very littlest learners, the youngest children in South Australia, and I commend the budget to the House.